Congressman Mark Green, joining us live from the southern border. Thank you, sir, for calling in. So whereabouts on the border are you?
I am now over by Brownsville. Started out at McAllen and just started working our way east, Dan, and thanks for having me on. But right now I'm in Brownsville, Texas.
All right, so I guess there's a couple of things that I'm very curious about, and I appreciate you joining us live from the border. So you know that you've seen the photographs, you've seen the videos, you've heard the horrific tales from Ted Cruz and some others. So what you've seen thus far, does it match what you expected to see from some of your colleagues? You've been hearing these stories. Tell me about the narrative versus reality.
You know, I think in reality, when you get down here and see this, it's even more shocking. A photo can't capture, you know, the 360-degree view of inside of one of those. You know, I was in the Donna facility today, which, by the way, costs the taxpayer $32 million a month. But in that site, built for 250 people, there are 3,989 people this morning, and 3,362 of those were kids, unaccompanied children. So, I mean, it's just kids stacked on top of kids. In one of the pods designed for 33 people, there were over 600 young girls. It just rips your heart out.
Whoa. So repeat what you just said. So you said a pod designed for 33 people has how many?
600 plus. It was like 620-something young girls in it, stacked like cordwood. I mean, it's unbelievable, the human tragedy that's going on at our border, and it's a complete failure of this president. He's the one who immediately struck down with executive orders the agreements that Trump made with Mexico and Guatemala, and it precipitated this crisis in addition to the House passing an amnesty bill. So now you've got just this human wave, and all of these border agents are working at these processing facilities. They can't man the border. And we know the crime's up because, like, all of last year, all of 2020, they caught 140 felons trying to cross the border. So far this year, 875, 63 of which are known gang members. We're talking murderers. You know, they've caught 90-something sexual offenders.
Yeah.
Felon sexual offenders. And they're not able to man the border, so we know there's many more. This morning, we were on the border, and what they call a splash-in, this drug cartel guy drives his vehicle into the river, into the Rio Grande, and flees, and then the guys on this side run rafts out, get the drugs out, and, you know, get them into the United States. Happening right while we're here on the border.
Well, it's pretty clear they have no fear. I mean, we saw that, when Ted Cruz was taking his tour, he was being taunted and tormented by some of these folks. And so, to me, it is just more indication, Congressman Mark Green, that there is a story to be told regarding what's going on the southern border. Did you have an opportunity, because I know that there's been a couple of different incidents where, lawmakers such as yourself, they've tried to take photographs, they've tried to take video and this kind of a thing, and they're not allowed to. Have you had the access that you wanted to have, and have you been able to take any pictures or anything like that?
Yeah, we did take some pictures, and we'll be, putting those out later. We need to take some faces off, blur some faces and things, but we did. And when you see these images, they're going to, they're disturbing. What's going on.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, you're right there, and have you had an opportunity to speak to the actual people that are trying to care for these kids? The Biden administration have been out there, begging for people to volunteer to come try to deal with these kinds of situations. How are the people that are trying to tend or deal or care for these kids, how are they coping with all this? Because this is clearly a human tragedy.
It's a great question. I sat there and watched them. I mean, they are obviously very heartbroken about what's going on, and they are exhausting themselves. There's more demand here than there is human capacity to take care of it. But state of Texas stepped up. The governor sent the Guard. He's sent other state police agencies down here. Of course, CBP has pulled people from the northern border and other parts of the country, and so they're augmenting as best they can. But there aren't enough people here. They're overwhelmed. You see the innovation, though. I mean, they put together a processing center underneath a bridge just north of the Rio Grande, and they're doing the best they can to process as many as they can. But they clearly have both personnel needs and equipment needs, and I'll be taking that list back to Washington.
Let me ask you, Congressman, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the Biden administration, they did allow the Associated Press into one of these facilities. I guess my question is, and I don't know if you saw the images that the Associated Press released, but from what you're seeing, the official, Associated Press version of the photographs and what the media was allowed access to via the Biden administration, are the images of those media outlets that, Biden allowed access to certain areas, is that matching what you're seeing? Or is the Biden administration only allowing access to places where it doesn't look nearly as bad as some of the places that you're seeing?
Well, I don't typically watch the leftist news agencies, so I didn't get a chance to see some of those images. I can just tell you that the still shots that I did see, it's far worse, but I mean, even that was bad, what I saw that was presented to them. So it's just kids that got all these space blankets, and it's just row after row after row, and there's no social distancing. They don't have the capacity to test for COVID while they're in the custody of the CBP. And this morning, while we were at the facility, about 320 or so were released to their who they have to place them with. And those people, when they come and take them, they test them. And out of that 320 or so, I think 35 tested positive for COVID. Mm-hmm. We know if that's a decent sample of the group, that about 10% of the people in these detention facilities are COVID positive being released into the country.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, I mean, you, of course, are a doctor, a medical doctor. So how healthy is it, do you think, in these pens where, they're designed for, far, far less than what is actually in these pens right now? I think you said, 33, and there's actually over 600 people in these particular pens. As a medical doctor, I mean, this can't be healthy, regardless of whether it's COVID or anything else.
No, and you have to think about the vaccination status of these children. They're coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and we don't know their vaccination status. These guys don't have the capacity to check their vaccination status. They could have measles, they could have, mumps, rubella, all that stuff, and we just don't know. And those vaccines aren't being given before they're released.
It just sounds
crowded.
I was just going to say, sir, it sounds like there's mass chaos there. It just sounds like there really is not anyone really in charge. I mean, part of what you and I discussed last week when I was filling in for Phil Valentine, the afternoon show, was, we really don't know, is Kamala Harris in charge? Is Joe Biden in charge? I mean, it seemed like a brief amount of time they came out and they said Kamala Harris was in charge, but she's refusing to go down to the southern border. Now some people are saying she's not in charge. I've seen different news articles from different media outlets. One will say she is in charge, others will say she's not in charge. Have you been able to tell who's actually running the show down there?
I will say down here, CBP is in control, and they are doing the right thing for these kids, and they're great Americans. Very well organized. I would not describe what's happening. I mean, it's tragic and they're overwhelmed, but it's not chaos. Now, down here, the CBP folks are doing a fantastic job. They're processing thousands of people a day. I mean, 37,000 people came through the Rio Grande area this month so far. And the highest month in 2020 was 17,000.
Yeah,
they're doing yeoman's work with minimal resources down here.
The Border Patrol. There have been a couple of different stories where the Border Patrol have been ordered not to speak to the media, or if you do, just stick to a particular narrative. Have you had the opportunity? Because I can't imagine the Border Patrol are happy with what's going on. Have you had the opportunity to speak to them?
Oh, yeah, I talked to them, and they actually had a little administration handler who's supposed to follow us around everywhere and make sure we didn't, that the CBP guys didn't. Well, that little handler got away from us, and we were able to talk, former Army guy to CBP guy, and I got the real skinny. So they're frustrated. I don't want to get any of them in trouble, but I got a list of what we need to do when I get back to Washington.
So I guess the next question is, everybody knows whose fault this is. This is Joe Biden's fault. And by the way, we agree on the whole Kamala Harris thing. It seems to me, and what I said last couple of days, is the only way, Congressman, that they can fix this is if they go back to some of these Trump-era policies. And if they do end up doing that, which they're very prideful, so they won't. But if they did, well, they can't do that under the watch of Kamala Harris. And you're right, it is a failure. So, it was Joe Biden's bright idea. Apparently, he said during his press conference that Kamala Harris is now in charge, and now they're sort of running away from that. So I would say yet another Biden misstep. But ultimately, my question is this. You're down there. You're on the border. Is there, I guess, any hope in sight for these kids and for these Border Patrol agents and for our sovereignty? Have you gotten any, sort of indication that they're going to, at some point, be able to get this under control?
No, I think, the Biden administration is just going to build more of those facilities like Donna. They want an open border. They got one. And that's open to fentanyl, open to cocaine, heroin, gang members, sex offenders. And yes, it is open to, better life-seeking migrants from Central America. But they don't seem to have any desire other than to facilitate people coming here.
They're literally importing all the things you just mentioned, not to mention the coronavirus. And do these kids, you said a lot of these folks are minors, obviously. Some are, some are not. But I guess my question is, when you look into the eyes and the faces of these kids, do they look scared? Do they look hopeless? Do they look hopeful because they finally reached America? From a personalized standpoint, what do you think is going through the minds of these kids?
It's hard to say, and I assure you there's probably every gamut of emotion. Most seem, like kids interacting with one another, playing with one another. There was one child that had been separated from his mom because she had to go to the hospital. I got to go to the medical holding area as well. Being a physician, they let me go in there and talk through some of the patients, et cetera. But that little guy, he wasn't very happy, which, you would expect. But while we were there, Mom was able to call from the hospital and talk to the little guy. And, he seemed to be happy with that. But, that it's all mix of emotions. For the most part, they're just, young kids in Estados Unidos now, and they're happy.
Congressman, was there part of you that wanted to grab a stethoscope and put on a white coat and just start helping out?
I always want to do that, but there really wasn't an opportunity. Now that I'm in this capacity, I have this job to do, and so we're moving on and seeing as much of the border and much of the operation as we can.